It's time to go on the record with WRAL News.
Great to be with you. I'm Ashley Rowe. The 2026 elections are here. Voting has begun in the primary elections, giving you and everyone else in North Carolina the chance to determine who will face off in November's general election. The highest profile race this year, without a doubt, is the open U.S. Senate seat, with big names Michael Whatley and Roy Cooper on the ballot. You'll also see races for the U.S. House of Representatives. These are high profile, not because of how competitive they are, but because of how uncompetitive they are. And the reason they're uncompetitive largely has to do with redistricting. Late last year, the North Carolina legislature approved a new congressional map that increased the GOP's advantage in races for the U.S. House of Representatives this year. They redrew the lines of our congressional districts so that the last remaining competitive district in the state became a GOP-leaning seat. District 1 went from this to this. They carved up a part of eastern North Carolina that has been represented by a black Democrat since 1993. It's most recently been held by Democrat Don Davis, but the new map literally draws him out of it. The significance of this cannot be understated. We might be one of the most competitive states in the nation in presidential races, but it's entirely possible that not a single one of our 14 U.S. House races is competitive in November. Think about that. A lot of people are not happy with this latest gerrymander. Large groups protested outside the state legislative building for days, trying to get lawmakers to reverse course. When things didn't go their way, they were removed from the gallery on the Senate chambers.
The question before. Okay. All right. We're going to have to clear the gallery.
What happened here and around the country was a direct response to President Trump's call to Republican-led states to redraw the maps so that more Republicans get elected to the House in the midterms. Lawmakers weren't shy about it either. Listen to what Senator Ralph Hayes, a Republican from Western North Carolina, said.
And if Democrats flip 4 seats in the upcoming midterm elections, they will take control of the House and torpedo President Trump's agenda.
It started with Texas, and after seeing success there, other states said, hey, let's try that too. 6 states enacted new maps this year, including Democratic-led California. Governor Gavin Newsom did this as a sort of a power play, a way of saying, if you gain seats elsewhere, I'm going to make sure you lose seats here. Not everyone, though, answered the call to get involved. Indiana leaders scrapped plans to redraw their maps. The president wasn't pleased by this. He thinks the Senate leader who sunk the effort should get voted out.
I'm sure that whenever his primary is, it's, I think, in 2 years, but I'm sure he'll go down. He'll go down. I'll certainly support anybody that wants to go against it.
We should take a step back and explain why President Trump is so focused on the midterms. Trump and the Republicans won big in the presidential race, and they want to keep control. Nothing will stifle those plans more than Democrats winning big in the midterm elections. History shows that it's a real threat. Since World War II, the president's party has lost House seats in 18 of 20 midterm elections. The only exceptions were Clinton during backlash to impeachment and Bush following 9/11. You know, change isn't coming fast enough. The opposition gets more motivated, and some policies turn out to be unpopular. We see this time and time again. In 1946, Truman lost 55 seats because of post-war inflation. In 1958, Eisenhower lost 48 seats during a recession. In 2010, Obama lost 63 House seats after passing the Affordable Care Act. And in 2018, Trump lost 41 seats amid backlash from child separation immigration. The midterms are designed to create balance, but it can also create gridlock. And President Trump does not want that to happen. Hence, why he told state lawmakers to fix the maps to help Republicans hold on to Congress control. It might sound anti-democratic. Some might even say it's bad and wrong, but it's legal. It's the monster that we have created, and it happens in both blue states and red states. A 2019 Supreme Court case, Rucho v. Common Cause, opened the floodgates. The High Court ruled partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts. You'll hear different interpretations of that, depending on who you ask, but it's essentially saying political gerrymandering is a political question, not a legal one. The Gerrymandering Project gives a report card for fairness to the redistricting maps around the country. Take a look at this. Some states have great grades, like Michigan, that use nonpartisan, citizen-led committees to fairly redraw the maps. They got an A. Oregon, run by Democrats, they got a D. They used all the Republicans in the rural part of the state to create one giant district where they can't threaten Democrats in the more populated areas. North Carolina, ooh, we got an F. And we can look to a bunch of different reasons why, dating back decades. In fact, actually, North Carolina is famous for redistricting. The old District 12 is considered America's best-known congressional district. Back in 1992, the Democratic Party-led General Assembly tried to pull off this wild configuration. See that yellow there? Stretching the district 160 miles through 12 counties in order to pick up predominantly black precincts in Charlotte and Durham. Gerrymandering in North Carolina has also been challenged in the Supreme Court a bunch of times over the decades, most recently in 2023. But remember what I said a minute ago. Gerrymandering is legal, unless you're doing it on the basis of race, which is extremely difficult to prove, especially considering just how much data these parties have about you. The framers, frankly, could have never imagined how much data parties could collect. They buy data from all those other companies, you know, the ones that track what you buy, what you drive, what you like on Facebook. And these parties can guess with pretty great accuracy which way you're likely to vote. Redistricting is one of the biggest issues in politics these days. Coming up, a lively debate with people who know this topic well. I brought the communications director for the North Carolina GOP, the chairwoman of the North Carolina Democratic Party, and a retired state Supreme Court justice into the studio. Hear what they have to say after the break. The North Carolina Constitution says all elections shall be free. 5 words. But free doesn't mean fair. And North Carolina legislators have not been shy about that. So let's continue our conversation about redistricting and gerrymandering with a panel who knows a whole lot about this topic. Joining me now is Matt Mercer, communications director for the North Carolina GOP. Retired State Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr, who has, you have had plenty of experience ruling on cases about redistricting. And we also have the chairwoman of the North Carolina Democratic Party, Anderson Clayton. Thank you all for being here. Justice Orr, you filed a lawsuit about political gerrymandering, which you lost, arguing that elections should be fair. But I just read what is written in the North Carolina Constitution. It's saying that all elections shall be free. Is there not a difference between free and fair?
Well, based on the Harper 3 decision that the North Carolina Supreme Court decided, the position of the court is that no, there isn't any requirement for fair elections, that free has a very narrow meaning. But I would note that even though we lost the case at the trial court, it is on appeal currently at the North Carolina Court of Appeals. But it's a very different legal theory than traditional gerrymandering cases. And it's about specific districts and whether the government, in this case the legislature, can rig the election in advance by manipulating the voter pools. And this is a legal and constitutional question that has not been decided previously, and I don't think is controlled by Harper 3 and the interpretation there about what is a free election.
You're talking about that Supreme Court ruling, but Phil Strack, the lawyer representing the legislators, has called that legal theory legal gobbledygook. I'm using his words. I'm not making this up. So is it legal gobbledygook? Where do things stand, Matt?
I think what you see right now is we have a great set of maps that we'll use for the 2026 elections, and I think every couple years it seems like there's some sort of change that needs to be made, mostly from Democrats, or in this case, Justice Orr suing over maps that are legal. And so what you're going to see now is that will continue. That will rack up more and more time that you'll spend covering that. But really, I think what you're going to see this year and years moving forward are fair maps drawn by Republican legislators, and especially at the congressional level, to maximize the Republican advantage, because that's what this state voted for.
You say fair, but again, we're talking fair versus free, Anderson.
I mean, I think that Republicans right now, the only way that they can hold power in the state is to gerrymander, which is what we saw earlier this year when Senator Phil Berger, after allowing or asking Donald Trump that if he traded a congressional district for an endorsement in a Senate district primary that he's now facing in his own backyard, because even Republicans are fed up with what Republicans from the General Assembly have been giving to them this year. I think all we saw was a power grab and a power play trying to target black voters in eastern North Carolina. And it's no different. What Matt said earlier about that Republicans haven't been the ones that have been aggressively trying to do this. And I'm like, well, Republicans were the ones that took back control of the North Carolina State Supreme Court. And the first thing that they did was re-gerrymander North Carolina from an even 7-7 split that actually represents what the state is right now, a 50-50 makeup of both political parties in that case scenario, and instead took that to being a 10-4 minority that earlier this year, like I mentioned, they took to an 11-1 or 11-3 that they're trying to do a power grab of right now. So I don't know how any of that is free or fair, in my personal opinion.
All right, let's get to a quote, okay? Senator Ralph Hise of Mitchell County said President Trump has called on Republican-controlled states across the country to fight fire with fire. This map, which you're referencing, answers that call. We're really at a point now where political gerrymandering is the norm. Let's listen to a clip from him.
The motivation behind this redraw is simple and singular. Draw a new map that will bring an additional Republican seat to the North Carolina congressional delegation.
So if I may,
sure.
That raises the very question which is in the case that's pending at the Court of Appeals. And I'm not sure Matt answered your question. Is it permissible for government, and that's the government, to manipulate the voter pool in order to predetermine the outcome of the election in NC1? And to me, fundamentally, that's against every constitutional principle, every tenet of democracy that I've ever learned in my long career. And yet, I can't get anybody at this point to answer whether that's permissible.
But political gerrymandering is legal in North Carolina.
It's absolutely legal, and I think what you're seeing is, to quote legal gobbledygook, is that the legislature has this power, and I think we have one person to thank for that. Roy Asbury Cooper, for not giving the governor a veto when the latest redistricting passed in the 1990s. I believe when you were on the Supreme Court as well, that passed and seemed to go okay. I think politics did not begin when Republicans took power at the General Assembly, and I think people need to remember that.
Yeah, what you just heard is a Republican Party that's standing by the fact that they do not believe that one person, one vote should be the law of the land, apparently, that they think that they should be able to predetermine election results. And that is what 70% of North Carolinians disagree with right now, which is also why Democrats on the North Carolina State Supreme Court are going to hold a seat this year with Justice Nita Earls, because people understand that Republicans are only trying to put more partisan politics into our elections instead of actually representing the people of North Carolina and their best interest. If they were, they would have passed a state budget by now, I think.
I would disagree that the North Carolina legislature or any legislature drawing maps has a blank check to use partisan decision-making in any way, shape, or form that they want to. I don't think the Rucho case that the U.S. Supreme Court decided, I don't think Harper 3, which the North Carolina Supreme Court decided, goes that far. It says in the context of those cases that they didn't have a test to determine what was too much. Well, if you're rigging an election, I would contend that's too much, and I think Rucho and Harper 3 support that interpretation.
I think politics and political maps in general always have a political element, right?
Yeah.
So what you're going to see is, hey, for instance, the 2022 maps that were referenced, Justice Orr, you donated money to Jeff Jackson and then grew him a congressional district.
Actually,
I don't think that was going to
like
affect anything. That there's always going to be partisanship and some sort of political angle in that. And so what I think the voters of this state have consistently done is return strong Republican majorities to the General Assembly for the purpose of drawing maps, which they have done.
Well, Republicans know something about nepotism, right? Having Phil Berger Sr. and Phil Berger Jr. right there, one in the legislature, one on the Supreme Court, backing each other up. I mean, I do think that you have to understand that the politics right now that we're looking at are being shaped by one party right now in this state alone.
Okay, so we've got all of your positions on that. I want to move on to timing of these gerrymandering, of these redistricting cases. So historically, we see redistricting happen every decade, right after the census comes out. That has changed with President Trump's call to all of the different states where he sees an ability to flip and to gain control or keep control of the House and Senate. So we've now seen that redistricting can happen whenever. What does this mean for the future? Are we just going to see redistricting happen before every election?
That's always been the case in North Carolina. It's not new, right? The fact that we've had 5 different maps in the last 8 years of a state legislature and also a state congressional map, I think that only proves to show why voters right now across the North Carolina map alone feel alienated right from their representatives. And I think it's shown why you have lower voter turnout in certain areas too, because people don't actually feel connected to their politics. And when you have Republicans that have predetermined where they're going to win races, you also have the fact they don't actually have to represent those constituents when they go to Raleigh or Washington, D.C. And that's what we've seen from Republicans this year, being willing to cut health care costs for people, being willing to actually raise costs earlier this year, and also looking at Medicaid cuts that we're seeing coming out of our legislature right now.
Really what you're going to see is the voters will have this in front of them in November, but we're talking, let's set a couple facts straight. We're talking about the congressional map for this purpose, and that we know what Democrats will do if they win a majority in the U.S. House. They will try to impeach President Trump. They will try to stop his agenda. And again, this is a state that's voted for that. This is a state that was responding to what California and Governor Gavin Newsom did to redraw their map after they had an independent commission, because that commission didn't draw enough of a gerrymandered map for California. And so redrawing North Carolina now is one seat, and it's keeping counties together, which again, the 1992 map is court-ordered gerrymandering from the U.S. Supreme Court way back then, where you could drive across a county and drive through about 4 different congressional districts. I don't know if that's really representing people in any sense. And so I think what you're going to see is this question has been before voters multiple times. Voters continue to return strong Republican majorities to the General Assembly, and they have the right to do this and will continue to do this.
Well, mid-decade redistricting is very rare and has only occurred when courts have ordered it. And so what has transpired in this election cycle, not just in North Carolina, but in other states, is highly unusual, and it's highly partisan in large part because President Trump wanted to ensure that he didn't lose a majority in the House of Representatives. And again, I go back to the misinterpretation of what the U.S. Supreme Court said in Rowe. It's being interpreted to say you can do anything you want politically anytime you want. And I think not only is that a misrepresentation of what the court said, but it's a horrible step for democracy if every 2 years, doesn't make any difference what state it is or what political party is doing it, if they can jump in and say, oh, well, let's cook the books on 2 more seats over here so that we can make sure and have a majority or a bigger majority, is just a huge blow to the whole democratic process.
We've been talking a lot about the state Supreme Court for good reason. We've got an upcoming election. Millions of dollars are being poured into the state Supreme Court race. We're going to see that even more so for the 2028 election when 3 seats are up for grabs there. You know, when we think about how much money is being poured in, and by the way, poured in from D.C., not necessarily from local donors here, should all of this money be pouring in? Because I think really what the money is being poured in for is so that these Supreme Court justices can rule in favor of whatever their party is on redistricting, not on the other things that really matter to the people. Well,
we're absolutely destroying the concept of an independent judiciary by this hyper-partisan, you're one of us, therefore you have to vote with us on these cases mindset that we're getting across the country and across the state. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is. I ran 2 partisan races for the Supreme Court. The most I ever raised was $200,000, you know, which wouldn't barely get me in the race today, you know. And so, you know, we collectively, just in the sense of good government, have got to find a way to try and depoliticize as much as possible these judicial elections, because they distort the records of the individuals running. You know, 30-second ads are not going to accurately describe sophisticated and complicated legal and constitutional rulings that judges and justices participate in, but it's really destroying the concept of an independent third branch of government that will independently decide these cases.
And I'm glad that he says that, because, you know, when Republicans in the state legislature chose to make judicial races partisan, I think that we saw the fact that they did that because they thought that that was the way to win those seats versus actually having free and fair judicial seats as well. Because we used to have Democrats that would win court races time and time again. Justice Riggs's race last year was the first time Democrats had held a Supreme Court justice seat since 2018 when Justice Earls ran the first time. And we did have to push money into that election because, as we know, judicial candidates do not have the same name recognition that candidates at the top of the ticket do. And unfortunately, Republicans in this state have taken judicial races and made them partisan. And again, to the point that I made earlier, injecting more politicization in our politics in the state of North Carolina that we desperately do not need.
I'll just say that I do appreciate that Anderson has made the platform of the Democratic Party when it comes to judicial races. We want to give voters less information. The voters deserve to know the partisan affiliation of the people running for these offices, because that is more information as a point for voters to consider. It's not our fault. Maybe you should look at your candidates as to why Republicans win at a much higher clip than Democrats since those races became partisan, and really evaluate kind of where your party is when it comes to the judiciary in general, with activist judges trying to make up laws out of thin air versus following the laws as written by the General Assembly.
Says the party that wants to put a state legislature who's written the laws and passed them right on the bench this year to represent as a Supreme Court justice, which I don't think anybody who's written the laws should then go and decide whether or not they should ethically be implemented across the state of North Carolina. But Republicans apparently do in the state at this point in time.
All right, guys, we have to wrap this up, but I appreciate all of your time, a lively discussion on a very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
So, if we already know whether the districts in our state are going to go red or blue, when does your vote matter most? Our state government reporter, Will Doran, is standing by with the answer for you after the break. As we mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, voting is now underway for the primary elections. Here with me now is state government reporter Will Doran. Will, the elections are now underway. People can vote. This is an important one for folks.
Yes, and because of exactly what we've just been talking about, gerrymandering, we don't really have a ton of competitive races here in North Carolina. The primaries are that much more important. Your vote matters so much more in a primary election than honestly it does for some of these general elections we have. Not everyone, but a lot of times, these races are decided in the primaries. And we see, in 2022, only 10% of North Carolinians voted in the primary. In 2018, it was 15%. So this is really low turnout. If you do go vote in a primary election, you have a ton of power to decide who actually represents you in D.C.
Wow. It really does strike you when you think about how few people actually go out, and yet this is their greatest way to exercise their right to vote.
Exactly.
Wow. Let's also talk about District 1. There have been challenges about the redistricting, gerrymandering there. Where do things stand?
Well, there was a court ruling on that. I was in court for that case. They've lost. That map is going to stand. It's going to be used for this election. The bigger question is, okay, what happens next time around when we get to 2028?
Yeah.
Do these arguments still come back? That case still could technically get appealed to the Supreme Court, but unlikely to happen, and especially with the current Supreme Court, probably unlikely to go well for the challengers.
Let's quickly talk about 2028. There are 3 seats that could change with the state Supreme Court, and this would be a big deal.
Yes, Democrats are going to spend a ton of money trying to flip those seats. Republicans are going to spend a ton of money trying to keep them, but Democrats will have the chance in 2028 to flip control of the Supreme Court ahead of 2030 when we do redistricting again, start this whole thing all over.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Will. If you've got something to say about tonight's discussion, we want to hear from you. Email ontherecord@WRAL.com. Thanks for being with us tonight.